Graham, thank you. Sir Daniel Hannan.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Douglas and David Owen both just made the very broad-minded point that there are arguments on both sides. And of course they're right. There are some perfectly valid arguments for voting to remain. It's not my job to tell you what those arguments are. But I will give my friends on the Remain side one bit of free advice. Cheer up. Have we ever encountered an argument in this country where there is so much pessimism and misery on one side? I'm struck by this every day. It's not just that the Remainers don't say anything nice about the United Kingdom. It's that they can't even find anything nice to say about the European Union. All they do instead is threaten us with the terrors of the earth in the event of a leave vote. It'll please Vladimir Putin. It'll cause World War III. It'll have ISIS delighted. And a new one from Alan Johnson yesterday. It'll mean that we never get to host the Olympics. I mean, what kind of people do they take us for? Is there not a part in the British character that says, don't you bloody well tell me what I can't do? Isn't there a part of us that, when being pushed around, becomes more resolute and more determined to stand up for our rights? And that's why I want us to use these next 3 weeks being positive, making an optimistic and cheerful case. I could stand here and harangue you for 10 minutes about the atrocities and abominations in Brussels. I could talk about the way the referendums are swatted aside. I could talk about the tax-free salaries, the 10,000 bureaucrats who earn more than the Prime Minister. I could talk about the obsessive micro-regulation of things, and you'd all be nodding along. And at the end, I can see one or two of you heard me do it before, at the end, none of you would feel any better. So I want to use my 10 minutes, and I want you to use the next 3 weeks to talk up this country, a merchant and maritime nation connected by language and law, by kinship and custom, by habit and history to every continent and archipelago. If we can't make a success of living under our own laws, trading with our friends and allies in Europe, but governing ourselves, who the hell can? We are the 5th largest economy in the world. We have the 4th military budget on the planet. We're one of 5 permanent seat holders on the UN Security Council, a leading member of the G7 and the G20, of NATO and the Commonwealth. We're sitting here in the world's capital city, a great, bold, spirited, multiracial entrepot, enriched by the ambition and energy of people who have come here from every corner of the planet to bring their talents to London. Our language is the most widely learned by the human race. How much bigger do we have to be before we're able to govern ourselves, trading with our friends in Europe? And so let's use the time we have to hold out a vision of a prosperous Britain, straightening its back after decades bent double under unnecessary EU regulation, of a secure Britain which, in a necessarily uncertain world, has taken back control to mitigate the risks that will surely come, because we must be better off taking those decisions ourselves than passing control to people who may not have our interests at heart, of an independent Britain where we recover that sublime right to hire and fire the people who pass our laws, and of a global Britain interested and involved in the affairs of every continent, including Europe. But a global Britain also that remembers its older friends across the oceans, in the parts of the world that are, in fact, still growing. As Boris Johnson points out, I think he was nicking the line from me, we are on the only continent growing more slowly than this one is Antarctica. And I have to tell you, that's no place for a country like ours. You know, we don't sit on great natural resources in this green, damp, exquisite island of ours. We have to make our way in the world by what we buy and sell. That means we have to be where the customers are. But as long as we're in the European Union, Brussels controls our trade policy. We have no free trade agreement with India. 9 years the EU has been talking about a free trade agreement with India and failing to sign it. Is there a country in this part of the world that stands to gain more from unrestricted commerce with that rising giant than ours? India is English-speaking, certainly for business purposes. It's common law. It's the third largest investor here. Owns more here than in the rest of the EU put together, Jaguar, Tetley's and so on. We're the third largest investor in India. There are 1.4 million Brits of Indian origin, but we can't sign a free trade agreement with India because Italian textile workers and French farmers and so on don't want the competition. We don't have a free trade agreement with Australia. It's being held up because of a dispute involving Italian tomato growers. Now, the Italian tomato growers may well be right. I don't know enough about the details of that case. But how on earth have we put ourselves in a position where we can't trade freely with an old friend like that because of an unrelated dispute? We don't even, have an EU trade agreement with Canada. We thought we had one. But now it turns out that the EU-Canadian deal is being vetoed by Romania and Bulgaria because of a row involving Romanian and Bulgarian applicants for Canadian visas. Now, again, the Romanians may have a point, but how on earth is it to our advantage to have our commerce with the parts of the world that are growing regulated by people whose interests are other than ours? Now, in fairness, we did today get a new argument from the Remain side. It wasn't all doom and gloom. It came from the former Foreign Secretary William Hague in his Telegraph column, where he said, we could stay in and reform it. He said, if we vote to remain, he said, if we vote to remain, the next 18 months, the next 18 months will be the best opportunity for us to get a fundamental reform. What the devil does he think we've been trying to do for the last 40 years, right? That is the policy that any British government, Labour or Conservative, even since before we joined, right back to Macmillan's time when we made the first application, they'd have all said, yeah, we want to get in there, get stuck in, make our case, build alliances, and then make it a more democratic, more open system, friendlier to the Commonwealth, more power devolved, not a federation. How's that working out? I mean, on what metric have we advanced that goal? With 40 years of getting it, the getting in there and making concessions bit, that's gone pretty well. But then, turning the EU in a different direction, it is by any possible measure we're further from that goal than we've ever been. And if there was any doubt in your minds, surely it must have been dispelled by the recent experience of the renegotiation. Just think about that. David Cameron spent 2 years crisscrossing the continent, asking for a fundamental overhaul. The other member states knew that there was going to be a referendum at the end of it. And yet, what did he come back with? Not one power returned, not one penny off the contributions, not even a new treaty. All of that process ended up producing an amendment to one directive about benefits claims by EU nationals. That's how intractable the European Union has shown itself to be. That's how unable or unwilling to reform. And so just ask yourselves this one question. If that is how the EU treats us now, their second largest financial contributor, before we have our vote on whether to leave, how will they treat us the day after we vote to remain? Please understand. Please understand that voting to stay in is not the same as voting to stay put. Voting to stay in means acquiescing in everything that is coming our way. The assimilation that is now planned in the military sphere, the political sphere, the economic sphere. We can see the twin crises in the Eurozone and the Schengen area unfolding before our eyes. And we know that the European Union is responding to both of those crises in the way that it responds to everything by demanding more powers for Brussels. And the question that we face on the 23rd of June is, are we going to make those problems our problems? You see, we do have other options. Because we kept the pound, because we kept our passport checks, we do have an alternative. We can reorient away from the enervated, declining, collapsing Eurozone back towards the rest of the world, not least our natural hinterland in the English-speaking common law countries. But don't imagine that there is an option on the ballot paper that allows us to stay where we are. The status quo is not on offer. Think of it rather as two diverging roads. One leads to a relationship with the EU based on a common market, not a common government. Such a relationship, indeed, as is enjoyed by every other non-EU state and territory that is geographically in Europe. Worth stressing, there is no country in Europe, with one exception, that faces trade barriers or tariffs when selling to the EU. Isle of Man, Macedonia, Montenegro, Monaco, Switzerland, any of them, they are all part of that broad free trade area that stretches from non-EU Iceland to non-EU Turkey. The only country that has chosen to stand aside is Belarus. So whatever the future holds for a post-EU Britain, the one thing that is certain is that we will not be excluded from EU markets. And I've never heard anyone in Brussels in the 17 years that I've been there suggesting that we would be. Even the Remain campaign don't really, they try and imply it, but they're not quite so dishonest as to make that claim outright. So that's the one road. Getting back our independence, free trade and political cooperation and military alliance with our friends in Europe, but self-government. But the other road, well, understand that the EU is not a settled dispensation. It's an evolving dynamic. Staying in means staying on a conveyor belt. And we know that all of the nasties that have been put to one side while we were having our referendum will come rushing out again. Harmonization of social security, harmonization of taxation, the European army that Jean-Claude Juncker keeps calling for every other day. He said it was brilliant. He said, we need a European army, not to use it, he said, just to scare Vladimir Putin. Well, I don't claim to be any kind of expert on the psychology of the Russian autocrat. But in a list of what scares him, I would be surprised if he is kept awake at night by the prospect of Jean-Claude Juncker saying to NATO, oh, don't worry, guys, we will take this from here. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. But if we vote for that, you think they're ever going to ask us again? We will have given our consent in perpetuity. That's it. Now, that's the honest case for Europe, right? That yes, we're primarily now Europeans, we're quite happy to be part of a federal state, or at least some kind of political union, and we should stop thinking of ourselves in national terms. There are people who believe that. They're keeping very quiet during this campaign, but theirs at least is an honourable, legitimate position. But what is not a position at all is the idea that you can cast some kind of qualified Remain vote. The idea that you can somehow say, I don't really like the way that the EU is going, but from risk aversion or whatever, I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt this time. Trust me on this, as someone who has spent a great deal of time in Brussels. Every vote to stay will be taken in Brussels as a warm round of applause and an endorsement of the federal scheme. Carry on, guys, you're doing a brilliant job. Keep going in that direction. That's what happens. That's what you're voting for if you vote to remain in. Edmund Burke, the great Whig MP and philosopher, used to say that a nation is a partnership between the people who have died and the people who are alive and the people who haven't yet been born. I was thinking a lot about the people who haven't yet been born because I had some happy news during the campaign. Shortly after the vote, we're expecting our third child, who's going to be born in July. This is going to be a rather... Oh, thank you very much. It's going to be a rather busy summer. What the late Roy Jenkins, your colleague, would have perhaps called a mouvementée summer. And of the many things that I hope for that child, one is that he'll grow up as the citizen of an independent country. This got me thinking about Burke and his partnership. You see, we're not just a random collection of individuals born to a different random collection of individuals. Being a nation means that we have a duty to keep intact the freedoms that we were lucky enough to inherit from our parents and pass them on securely to the next generation. My late father was prepared in 1944 to volunteer to defend with force of arms our right to live under our own laws and our own people in our own sovereign parliament. I don't want his grandchildren to lose that portion of their inheritance. Another of his grandchildren, my elder daughter, is reading all the war poets at the moment. Her school is doing a great thing about the centenary. My old school, 749 boys of that school died in the First World War. But she was reading a poem which I'd never come across before, by Siegfried Sassoon, which takes the form of a letter in verse to Robert Graves. And there's a wonderful moment where he looks up from the hellishness of the trenches to a flare, and his eye is drawn up by the illumination, and he dreams on better things. And there's a beautiful line. He says, "For I know dreams will triumph, though the dark scowls above me where I go." My friends, this is about self-confidence. It's about self-belief. It's about whether we think we're good enough to flourish in the world, taking our own decisions. Look around you. This is the greatest metropolis on the planet. There's never been a better time to be alive and in London than now. And look a little bit further. This is a blessed country, never more so than in this season, thick and rank and green with May, the larks and the linnets singing in the high places, the season pulsing around us. Our story is not yet told. We still have more to give. And when you go to vote on the 23rd, do it in the knowledge that this is a great country whose song is not yet sung. For I know dreams will triumph.